Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Islam.
Islam means submission to the one God, the Almighty, the Creator.
We bring to you today an interview with the Prime Minister of Malaysia, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. The interview was conducted after his re-election at the end of 1999. Dr. Mahathir Mohamad is now the longest-serving elected leader in the world. In this candid interview, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad talks about local as well as global challenges faced by the Islamic world. He discusses his past experiences as Prime Minister, the lessons he has learned from them, his present challenges, and his plans for the future of Malaysia. The Prime Minister also discusses the impact of the West and information age on the rest of the world. He discusses the role played by local and Western media and its implications.
We face very serious economic and financial problems, and we had to, our growth was stunted. We had to fight our way back to eventually overcome this attack on our deliberate attack on our economy.
One of the characteristics of the Quran is moderation, or harmony between the divine and the human, the spiritual and the material, the individual and the collective, and so on. The Quran pays due attention to all the facts of life and all the needs of man, and deals with them in such a way as to help man to realize the noble objectives of his being. For this approach of moderation, the Quran calls the Muslims a middle nation, and with this middleness, they are called the best people ever evolved for mankind, as they enjoin the right and combat the wrong and believe in God. In our interview, the Prime Minister will talk about his recent re-election victory, the crisis prior to it, the impact of his victory, and the challenges that he now faces.
Congratulations, Mr. Prime Minister, on your election victory. You are now the longest-serving elected leader in the world. How does it feel?
I don't feel anything particularly. It's just an accident in one's career.
Well, it certainly cannot be accident. I mean, this thing is consistency. This thing is about performance. I mean, if people judge you election after election to be their leader, it cannot be an accident.
Well, then I must say maybe we are doing something right.
Yes. The last 4 years were obviously full of turmoil in the region. As you look back, is there anything that you regret or you would have done differently?
Well, I regret what people have done to us, but we don't regret what we have done for ourselves.
Right. And when you say what people have done to us, you're referring to the currency crises and the economic
mainly the currency crisis. As you know, we were growing healthily at 8% per annum, and it looks like we are going to continue like that for many more years. But then when our currency was suddenly devalued by the currency traders, we faced very serious economic and financial problems, and we had to, our growth was stunted. We had to fight our way back to eventually overcome this attack on our deliberate attack on our economy.
So in other words, what lessons does one derive or you have derived from managing the economic crisis? Is it that you would not look at the quote-unquote mega projects that you were trying to run, or what would you have, or is there any different that anything different that you would do?
What we have learned is that we cannot really depend upon others. We must depend upon ourselves. We must truly be independent. And there is talk, of course, about our so-called mega projects. They are not mega at all, because all projects in Malaysia are very big, even by the private sector. Here, the private sector develop whole towns, whole communities, complete with everything. For the government to build this project is just to meet the needs of the country. These are infrastructure projects, basically. They are big, no doubt, but they have not caused us to get into debt to the point where we would not be able to manage our economy. This is what happens to other countries. They borrow too much. We don't borrow. We build these projects, but we have not lost money because of them. In fact, we are making money from them. We will make more money from them. At the same time, of course, it has not strained our financial position.
Well, I guess it must have been hard for you to convince a whole lot of people within your country of what you were saying. And now I'm sure the election mandate and the feeling has changed, or has it changed?
Well, the idea, the talk about mega projects actually started in the foreign press. It was picked up by the locals. And of course, the opposition party find it is a useful issue to belabor the government with, and they have made full use of it. And some people, not really examining things properly, believe in them. So we had a tough time, no doubt, during the election. This was made use of. But nevertheless, the thinking people, the people who are really knowledgeable about the economy of this country, they know that this is not bad for the economy, it is good for the economy, and they supported the government. That is why we won.
Besides all of this, the victory certainly still continues to sort of be debated in the press, as I'm sure you're aware of. It has raised a few questions. How do you assess the impact of your victory in this election significantly on the future politics in Malaysia?
In the first place, the press had always made very gloomy predictions about our elections, and invariably they have been proven wrong. Over the last 5 elections, they have been proven wrong, but this will not deter them. They will continue to say that although we won, but actually we lost. I mean, this is the kind of thing that I compare to showing a piece of white paper and say, this is white. He says, yes, although it looks white, but actually it is black. And see, against this thing we cannot argue. Right. But as far as we are concerned, we have won for ourselves 5 years of stability. And from now on, we can continue with our programs to develop the country so that we will progress towards our objective of becoming a developed country.
One casualty that certainly is being discussed more and more, even here, is the Malay unity in this election. What do you say to that?
Yeah, we see Malays are Muslims, and Muslims normally are loath to go against religious personalities. Unfortunately, the people who are opposed to us are made up of religious personalities who would like to rule this country. And they tell a lot of lies about religion to the Malay constituents. And these people accept what they said, For example, they said that I am about to have or have had diplomatic relations with Israel, which is not true at all. But they actually produced a letter supposed to be written by me, but with the wrong signature, saying that I have now established relation with Israel, have asked Israel for funds for my party and all that. And the people on the ground believe this.
Yes, and on the other hand, you are also accused of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, on the other hand, the Israelis accuse me of being
So you're getting it from both
I get
sides.
it from both sides.
But I mean, you raised that question. Why wouldn't the Muslim countries have a relationship with Israel? I mean,
yeah, our stand is that until Israel resolves its problem with Palestine, according to the agreement, that we cannot have diplomatic relations with Israel. That is our stand, and it has always been our stand.
so after you think that this final settlement is over, then there is a possibility.
There
that
is the
this-
possibility,
Right.
yes.
Also, from this election, there is an ongoing feeling that even the Chinese vote, which led to your victory, was not as much for you, but it was to keep the so-called Islamists out. How do you assess that?
No, I don't think so. I think it is very much for the BN, because the Chinese are mainly involved in business, and they appreciated what the government did in order to turn around the economy. Many of them were saved from bankruptcy and numerous troubles that they had with the banks. But the government took action which benefited them, and they are appreciative of that.
Yes. Now, how do you see, you have just announced your new cabinet, and how do you see the succession question, which I'm sure is repeatedly sort of brought up?
Well, my deputy will obviously succeed me. I always believe that you can't have people who are exactly the same. My deputy will be different. He will have his own way of doing things. But I have full faith that he will be able to carry out in his own way, in his own style.
And for your next term now, what do you see as the future challenges ahead of you in leading Malaysia into the next millennium?
I think there is a need, of course, to inform the people, especially the Malays, about what we are doing. Maybe we were not doing that effectively enough, because a lot of them can be so easily misled by the opposition. We are doing this for their own good, but the opposition is saying a lot of things, taking advantage, of course, from the charges made by the former Deputy Prime Minister, that we are corrupt, not transparent, that we practice nepotism, cronyism, etc. Once people latch onto that, they believe in it and they will stick to it. So we have to correct that. Once we correct that, I think we will resuscitate our party.
Yes. Is there any chance for the former Deputy Prime Minister to be released or forgiven, or any sense of...
That is a legal process, and the laws of this country applies to everyone, whether he is the Deputy Prime Minister or ministers. Our ministers have been sentenced to death. Our ministers have been jailed. They are still serving in the government, but because they were found guilty by the courts, then the courts take action. We don't defend our ministers. They have to defend themselves. So here we leave it to the courts to decide. It's not for the government to decide whether to release or not to release.
Yes.
This is a misperception that I find difficult to understand. On the one hand, they tell us, you are interfering with the courts. And then they ask us, you should interfere with the courts to release the man. How do you reconcile the two ideas? You don't like me to interfere with the courts. At the same time, you ask me, please interfere with the courts in order to release your friend.
Yes, not as much as my friend, but I'm asking a question.
No, I'm talking about, friend
Yes.
means these are other people who talk to me, not
yes.
you.
Where do you now stand in terms of the interaction of Asian values with the expansive Western influences. Now, I read your book and very carefully. I thought it would be an appropriate question.
I think Asians must put up a stand because their values are good. The changes that are taking in the system of values of the world is not all to the good. Basically, they are an expression of a Western desire to once again dominate the world as they did before when they had empires. Now they have no empires, but through economic dominance, they can achieve the same objective.
Yes, and again that brings me to my next question. This whole idea of globalism, borderless capitalism, free market economy, is this all new form of economic colonialism, or how do you see that?
Well, I see that as an attempt to dominate the world. You see, when they talk about a borderless world, and we ask them, if it is borderless, would you allow 300 million Chinese and 200 million Indians to migrate to your country? I said, no, that is not, it's not borderless to that. It is borderless only to capital. Now, why do you only want borderlessness to apply to something where you have an advantage? The Asian countries have an advantage.
Yes. This gap that exists between the developing world and the fully industrialized developed world, does it seem to you to be ever going to be breached? Because with the information age, there is a feeling that it would only increase the expanse, or am I correct?
It can be increased, but to say that you must not regulate anything at all, there must be deregulation in everything, is absurd, because the fact of the WTO negotiation is actually to regulate.
Yes.
Regulate so that people open. You can regulate to close things also.
Yes, WTO raised a big issue back home. There were a lot of protests by several groups, the environmentalists and the labor unions. It was all so in terms of WTO and all of these trade treaties that are coming about, wouldn't that anyway increase the labor costs and the whole idea of inflation and all of that for our growing economies?
Well, it will, of course, because the whole idea is to make us less competitive.
Yes.
Our competitive edge is based on our lower cost of living,
Yes.
which also means lower cost of labor. What they want to do is to increase our cost of labor and along with it our cost of living, and then we lose our competitiveness because the technology is still with them, the capital is still with them. What we have as a competitive advantage is going to be taken away from us. In the end, of course, we have to submit if this goes on at that rate.
Yes. With the impact on of information technology now, and you have been a champion of this in Malaysia for all these years, do you see that with that and with the Western influences, the cultural values that you talk about, how would they be impacted positively, negatively? One can exercise control, but one cannot stop the flow of information.
No, I agree. We cannot stop the flow of information. In fact, we experienced that during the latest election when the internet was used very extensively to hammer the government. We accept that, but on the other hand, we too have information that we can disseminate, and we want to play a role here. And there should not be a massive block on the part of the very big Western media that any opinions and views that are contrary to theirs should be stopped. In fact, that is what they try to do. If I say something that is against them, they won't publish a word of it.
Yes. But by the same token, they have accused you also during the elections of utilizing the state-owned media and advertising which is very negative and
No, it is not quite true. In fact, as you know, this country is open to the foreign TV. People can see CNN, CNBC, and they are campaigning for the opposition all the time, never giving us a fair chance at all. Now, if our TV also shows that, then we will be lost because we are not getting a fair deal at all. And foreign newspapers are published in this country. Herald Tribune, Wall Street Journal are published in this country and freely distributed. We're not stopping them. And for the opposition have got their own papers which are freely distributed. Also, of course, the extensive use of the internet damage us because we don't have time even to reply to them. So many accusations being thrown at us.
But do you see privatization of the news channels and outlets as you go on in the next term, more liberalization of policies in that regard? Or?
Yeah, they have been privatized, in fact, but it is up to them what policy they want to support. If they want to support the government, it is their right to say that the private broadcasting should not support the government is to say that you deny them the right of choice. As much as we have no say in what the CNN has to say about us, that is their choice. To tell lies about us, we accept.
You have been a favorite of the Western media in terms of their criticism to some degree. And you have also taken, you have really lashed out in a number of ways. How do you see your relationship in the future now? Do you?
No, it's not going to be good for as long as they are not fair to us. We are not asking them to praise us all the way. Tell us when we are wrong, but don't cook up things and make us appear very bad in the eyes of the world.
Yes.
You know, visitors to this country invariably say, but this is quite different from what we have read about your country, what we have seen on TV about your country.
Except Vice President Al Gore had something to say, which I'm sure.
Well, he has his own agenda. He comes here to tell us, to tell the people here to overthrow the government. That is something that we have never heard of from our guests yet.
Yes, I think he was criticized by the Western press as far as that goes. Now turning a little bit more to the Muslim issues, you have certainly shown here in Malaysia that pluralism and a tolerant society is essential for Islam and Muslims, and yet it seems that there is very little of it across the country. And so my question is, how do you see the sense of the Muslim Ummah in the next millennium? What should we be doing? What, in your sort of general sense, are the priorities?
As far as I'm concerned, we should follow the teachings of Islam. It is all that we have done is to be found in the Quran and the Hadith. You know, we are told that that others are not Muslim. They pray in their own way, and we pray in our way. To them, their way. To us, our way. So why is it that we want to oppress others who are not Muslim? In this country, we don't oppress others. If they want to be Christians, that's their business. But don't try to influence us and change us. That's all that we ask. So because of this understanding in Malaysia, there has been very little religious intolerance on the part of any religion here. They accept that we are different. We can celebrate each other's festival. For those who are not the followers of that religion, it is just a celebration. It has no religious connotation. For example, during Eid al-Fitr, I'll be receiving thousands of people who are of different religions entirely. They come to greet me on Eid al-Fitr because it's good to recognize that I'm a Muslim and this is my festival. And if it is their festival, I go there not to pray, but merely to greet them and wish them well. I don't think that is against the teachings of Islam.
Why is it that that the understanding of these principles of tolerance and mutual respect the Muslims seem to be falling short in other parts of the world. Why do you think, or what should be done? I mean, I'm talking to you as someone who has practically made it happen here. And
we have the problem of the people who are said to be learned in religion, who have attained certain stature, status in society, and they have gained influence, and they fear that if they don't have a full say in the interpretation of the religion, then they would lose their influence. So they are against going back to the Quran and reading it and understanding it. They want us to follow the interpretations that they have made.
yes, so in other words, this whole idea of a cultural sort of a pattern which has set in the thinking of Muslims, that has to change.
Yeah, that has to change. You see, I have been condemned because they say that I do not recognize the ulama. But what I did say was that I cannot recognize anyone who claims to be an ulama as an ulama. The person who is to be accepted as an ulama must have achieved a certain degree of learning, recognition in the society before I would say that he is an ulama. And a person who is committed to a political party and interprets religion according to his political beliefs, I cannot accept as an ulama. But nevertheless, they say that you must not question an ulama.
Yes, so blind following or
you must follow them blindly. Yes.
Right. And in fact, in today's paper, the news is that you've asked that the mosque committees who have played political role should be questioned, or would that be another form of censorship from the pulpit? Or
no, it's not censorship. But when people go into the mosque in order to teach something that is against the teachings of Islam, then the purpose of the mosque is lost. You know, the mosque is there for Muslims to gather and pray and establish silat rahim, good relation between them. But when you go to the mosque and somebody gives a speech that condemns this faction and that faction and promotes his own political party, not religion, political party, then I think that is an abuse of the mosque.
yes. Now, could you comment on some of the ongoing issues which are directly impacting on the Muslims? I mean, the troubled areas, for instance, first Indonesia in your own backyard. What happened there, and how do you assess the progress or the events there?
Basically, every time you see a movement to modernize Muslim communities so that we can catch up with the others and be able to compete with them to rebuild a strong Muslim nation, you find certain groups not happy with that, and they will do their best to say that this is not in accordance with the teachings of Islam. And because they have a grip on the population, they are able to frustrate any movement at all which tries to modernize and bring up the Muslims to be at par, to be able to compete with the non-Muslims. This has been going on for a long time, since Egypt under Muhammad Ali and the rest. Of course, there is this problem with Kemal Atatürk, who actually discarded Islam entirely, but he did not understand the teachings of Islam. I think the teachings of Islam are right, but the people who want to keep the power within their own hands are interpreting it so that we will never be able to make any progress and get out of their grips.
So this whole thing in in Indonesia, the East Timor episode, what does one learn from there? I mean, I want your insight into it.
Well, every country is faced with the possibility of fragmentation. The moment you become weak, outside forces will force you to give up territories. We see this happening in Russia. We see this happening in Yugoslavia. We are seeing it in Indonesia. And I think certain forces would like to see it happen in many countries, including China.
Yes. But you allude to, in your reply, to maybe forces that are external. But isn't there some internal weakness on the part of Muslims also, who are not able to position their right causes properly?
Yeah, that is absolutely true. The Muslim people are quite fond of blaming others for their fragmentation. But on the other hand, if they know that others are doing this deliberately to weaken them, why can't they come together? But once they try to come together, then there is this struggle between the Orthodox who want to keep the status quo and those who want to make progress.
Yes.
And that provides an opportunity for others to come in and split and weaken the Muslim community.
Yes. Coming back to the issues that Muslims are painstakingly facing presently, we have just seen what has happened in the Balkans. Now it's Chechnya. How can we help, and what should be done, and why is it that this is happening to us? I mean, the Jews used to ask this question, why us? And I think it's probably the Muslims' turn. I don't know any.
Well, obviously it is the Muslims' turn now because they are weak. Basically, it's a question of mind being right. If you are strong, this will not happen to you. If you are weak, it will happen to you. There is no Muslim nation strong enough to put a stop to what is happening in Chechnya. We have to appeal to non-Muslim countries. And they are, of course, they don't want to take undue risk. With Kosovo, yes, that too after very prolonged negotiation and many deaths. But with Chechnya, who is going to go to war with Russia in order to save Chechnya? No one is going to do that.
But any of the Muslim nations, including Malaysia, have they raised a voice, registered protest, or got the Russian ambassador in and said, well, look, you can't do this?
Yes, we have protested, of course. But we feel that it's not possible for Chechnya to gain its independence, not at this stage anyway. And they are being foolhardy in trying to fight against such a big nation as Russia, knowing full well, of course, the Russians are not going to be merciful towards them. We would like to advise the Chechnya that they should accept that they cannot do what they want to do. They should accept what has been given to them in the past and rebuild their country first, instead of trying to take on the whole of Russia. We feel very sorry for them. We would like to help them in terms of humanitarian aid, but that is all that we can do.
Would you accept any refugees here if there are? Or?
Well, if they want to come, we have accepted Albanians and these Bosnians. They are all here still. We have given them asylum. They have even stayed here, do business here.
The other areas that are troublesome, of course, one is Afghanistan. Sitting in the West, reading about how Islam is being completely read or misread just through what is happening in Afghanistan. How do we bring about some understanding of the issue or resolution?
That is going to be very difficult because they are not interpreting Islam in the context of a modern world. To interpret Islam as if we are still living in the 7th century, I think is to to show that Islam is not compatible with progress, and that is not so. In Islam, of course, you have to take into consideration the environment, the possibilities of doing things. For example, if you are a Muslim minority in America, you don't try to apply hudud laws and chop off hands. You have to accept the laws of the country. So you can make this adjustment. We are living in a world that is where we are very weak, and people can do anything they want to us, and we show these things, which makes us seemingly less capable of adjusting to what is happening around the world, and this is not going to be good for Islam.
Yes, repeatedly we are showing a very dark side of ourselves to the world, and we are always called on the issue of human rights. What do you think we should be doing to restore some dignity, because it seems like we are working without any self-confidence, and therefore we are continuously being the gender issue which remains unresolved, the treatment of women, and so many other things, the repressive laws that are acted out in the name of Sharia.
I believe these are all wrong interpretations, because women were more free during the time of the Prophet. They even followed the men to war. They gave treatment to the wounded and all that. To say that women should just stay in the kitchen and do nothing else is contrary to the teachings of Islam. We who believe in the proper teachings of Islam, we should really be able to argue with them and to fight out with them, because these people see things very narrowly in the terms of something almost pre-Islamic, because in the pre-Islamic society in Saudi Arabia, there was this kind of treatment of women. When Islam came, it liberated the women, but these people are going to interpret Islam according to the pre-Islamic thinking.
Yes.
And that is wrong. But people must be brave enough. There must be some learned Muslim who is brave enough to stand up and say this is wrong.
Yes. What about a very troublesome area that I think in the year 2000 will create more problems, the issue of Jerusalem? How do you see that?
Well, I think Israel should not claim Jerusalem as their capital, but they can stay there. They can even share in the administration of Jerusalem, because there are enclaves which belongs to the Jews, and there are also Christians there. The Arabs are not insisting that it should be entirely Muslim. They accepted the Christians. Why can't the Jews accept that they are part of the Jerusalem community, and that Jerusalem does not belong to Israel?
So you're recommending a shared sovereignty?
Shared sovereignty, yes.
Yes. Would it be conceivably under United Nations, do you think, or?
Well, perhaps supervision by United Nations initially, but eventually they should be able to work out together. There are so many other countries where people share. I mean, Muslims are now sharing some role in the administration, even in America. And see, why can't we accept the participation of people of other religion in a place where they have already been there anyway?
Another potential issue which can adversely impact in the region is this issue of Kashmir, the India-Pakistan issue. How do you think this can ever be resolved? Because without that, there can be no peace in that subcontinent.
We have always supported the UN resolution on Kashmir, and if both parties follow the UN resolution, it will be resolved.
Yes. But it seems like they are unyielding in their position. Bilateral talks are not delivering anything, and there is at least a feeling amongst the American Muslims that perhaps their country should intervene or play an honest broker's role, as they did when Can anybody else do that, including yourself, who has credibility on both sides?
No, I don't think I can do that either. I think when people have taken a very extreme stand, they find it difficult to yield. Now both parties have become very recalcitrant. You see, they are not willing to listen anymore to reason. You see, so it's very difficult to. I'm not promoting myself as an intermediary because this is too difficult even for me.
Yes, especially the nuclear backdrop is very troublesome for, I'm sure, for the region, for the world, and this is why some hope from some direction should come in this.
Well, when you talk about nuclear weapons, I don't think of India, Pakistan and India. I think nuclear weapons as a whole should be destroyed completely. Nobody should possess nuclear weapons.
So therefore you agree with what India has said about not signing the nuclear ban treaty?
Well, if all the countries agree, then we should do away with nuclear weapons. It's too destructive.
So you mean all of the countries who are who have nuclear arsenal should disarm?
Should disarm.
Right. Coming now to more personal issues. Of course, now you're serving another term, but I'm sure retirement is in the cards somewhere. And what sort of plans do you have for retirement?
Well, I have to prepare my party and the leaders of my party first before I can retire. I can't just say I'm tired and leave. That would be very irresponsible. So much as I would like to retire, I have a duty to the party, to the people of this country also, and I will do my best to prepare people to take over from me.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I enjoyed talking to you. It's always a pleasure, and God help you with your next term.
Thank you.
After the interview, Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad made an announcement declaring Deputy Prime Minister Abdullah Ahmed Badawi his successor.
The teachings of the religion of Islam be inculcated in the young people. It's better to let them know when they are young, to get them accustomed to praying 5 times a day, to fast, and to do good things, to cultivate a feeling of respect for the elders and for others, and to get them to feel that peace is better than war.
On behalf of the Islamic Information Service, this is J.D. Hall, thanking you for joining us this week and asking you to please be sure to join us next week for Islam. Assalamu alaikum.